Greetings, Commanders, Cerebrits, and Executors. In this episode, we're going to be talking about strategy and decision making. There are a lot of skills in playing StarCraft that you'll barely be conscious of gaining as you continue to practice. But what you consciously think about when playing the game is also important. In the previous episode, I talked about practicing actions until they become automatic. Another reason it's helpful to do that is because if you can do simple things like building units automatically, it frees up your conscious mind to make larger strategic decisions and plan your game in the long term. You can't do everything in StarCraft. It's well worth learning to use hotkeys, control groups, camera locations to speed up your play and juggle more tasks at the same time. But even with all the tools and experience at your disposal, you have limits. You'll never be able to perform every single task that StarCraft is presenting that you could be doing. So you have to decide what is most important to focus on. As I said early in the Improving at StarCraft subseries, macro is usually what's most important. Prioritize mining resources and building as many army units as possible. Large armies are usually the easiest way to win. Building more is usually more important than precisely controlling the combat units you currently have. Of course, it's better if you can both manage your economy to build a large army and control that army's fighting in detail, but if you have to choose one, most of the time it's the better choice to focus on macro. However, you can significantly improve what your army accomplishes by making other good decisions in the game. To do this, you need information. Scouting is when you look at what the opponent is doing so you can make better decisions about what you should do. Generally, scouting involves sending one of your units into the enemy's territory so you can see their units, their bases, their buildings. In the early game, you might send a worker to find their base and see what they're doing. Later on, you might use some of the special tools of your race. Zerg have lots of flying overlords they can send in to scout the enemy. Protoss have the Observer, which is permanently cloaked and thus better at getting into the enemy's base alive than most other units. Terran can use their scanner sweep to view enemy territory without risking a unit. When you scout the enemy, you want to ask questions like, what combat units are in their army? Where is their army positioned? What bases are they mining resources from, and how well defended are those bases? If you have this kind of information, you can choose when and where to attack for maximum value. If you're going to attack, it's best to do so just after powerful upgrades finish researching or important units finish building. When these kinds of events happen, your army suddenly becomes much more powerful than it was before, so you'll have a better chance of winning fights against the enemy at that moment because the enemy hasn't had as much time to adapt to your army's increase in power. These are called power spikes. You want to time your attacks to hit the enemy just as you reach a power spike, if you can, and to avoid attacking if the enemy is reaching power spikes. Attack when strong units have just finished. Attack when important upgrades have just finished. Attack valuable targets the enemy army isn't defending. But you always want to choose to attack when you are in a position for the attack to go favorably. If the enemy is well prepared, sometimes the best choice is not to attack at all and wait for a better opportunity. In StarCraft, there are 3 basic ways you can play. You can attack or be aggressive, you can defend, you can be defensive, or you can be greedy. Aggressive means you build a lot of combat units right now. Defensive means you prepare your base to be attacked, choosing units or defensive buildings that are strong but slow or unable to move. Greedy means you don't build many fighting units at all, but you invest a lot of resources into workers, more bases, technology, or upgrades. An aggressive player can attack soon and will probably win if they fight, but they're not getting access to more powerful technology in the long term because most of their resources are going into building a big army now. A defensive player will be very well positioned to hold off enemy attacks, but has trouble launching an attack themselves because the forces that are best defensively are generally slow or immobile. A greedy player will have far larger and more powerful armies in the future, but right now they've put a lot of their resources into improving their economy, into accessing more technology, so they haven't put those resources into their army, and that means they're vulnerable to attack in the near future before their extra resources kick in and really increase the size of the army they can field. If you can identify which of these your opponent is doing right now, it can help you decide how to play in response. If your opponent is trying to attack, then you want to defend. If your opponent is trying to defend, then attacking into them is doing the very thing they are best prepared for. You don't want to do that. Instead, if your opponent is defensive, you want to be greedy because it's going to be very hard for a defensive player to launch an attack against their greedy opponent and exploit the fact that the greedy player isn't very ready to defend themselves. If your opponent is playing greedy, then they're not very well prepared to deal with your armies, so you want to attack them because they'll have a hard time holding it off. If you can follow this basic approach, it allows you to exploit the weaknesses of each basic playstyle, which gives you the best chance of getting ahead of your opponent. So while you're playing StarCraft, try to remember to think about the important decisions of what state the game is in right now. What is your opponent doing? What might your opponent be planning? And what should you aim to do next in order to best take advantage of where the game is heading?